Please put your hands together and welcome Joshua Davis to the Hang Time stage.
My name is Joshua Davis. I've been making work for about 20 some odd years now. And I'm just going to talk about pathfinding today. And with my presentation, I've kind of broken it down into a bunch of different sections to show you kind of how I come up with the ideas that I come up with. And so the theme is pathfinding. You can find me on Instagram. That's probably where I post the most. I'm on a PlayStation on Instagram. And Instagram is kind of an interesting place for me because for Instagram posts itself, like it's where I share a lot of my ideas. And then with the addition of Instagram stories, it allows me to show kind of the behind the scenes, sort of the things that I'm thinking about each day. So when I'm in my studio, I'm making things, I know I can share this content, and I know that it's going to disappear after 24 hours. And I take Instagram stories super, super serious. There's audio. There is no sound. That's me yelling, of course I'm a wizard. Oh, man. You got to fix the audio because there's a ton of audio. So Instagram stories, I apologize ahead of time. There's some weird things that I have to do in my studio. These are just things that I have to do. The nice thing about Instagram is that if I posted a 1-minute piece on Instagram, usually there's probably a fuller length 2K or 6-minute version on Vimeo. I don't know what's going on. I do not have my presentation up. So this is what I did for AC/DC's Back to Black. It's sorry about that. Creative coding, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I basically everything you're going to see on screen, I program. For the nerds out there, I usually dev on a Mac. I'm using Sublime Text 3. I'm using an environment called processing. I have my own library called Hype. I'm mostly working in GLSL shaders. If you don't know what these are, you need to look this up because that's the hot sauce. But I'm deploying on a PC. Usually I will build with Gradle. I'm executing a full Java application that loads in processing core and all this other stuff. And again, that's for the nerds. We can talk about that later. I do teach on Skillshare and also on Patreon, where I'm sharing a lot of this work that I'm creating. And these kind of communities are great because people will be like, I want to know how to use a MIDI controller, and I'll be like, well, I will show you. And so I'm sort of writing this code and deploying it on these learning platforms, which are really fantastic. So today, again, it's pathfinding. I think, a lot of designers, I think they have an idea in their head, and they sit down and they sort of execute that idea. I don't really do that. I'm interested in this idea of pathfinding, which is I sort of have an idea, and I want to see where that idea takes me. And so usually the end result, I'm always surprised. So that pathfinding bit I'm going to break down into 3 sections, which is tools, process, and project. So what are the tools that I make and sort of the tricks that I put in some of these tools? What's the process of pathfinding, and how do these turn into actual projects? So first I'm going to talk about tools, and these are kind of like my secrets for how I make work. Again, I'm using programming, and so a really great trick that I've been using is PNG as color flow. And basically what I'll do is I'll make gradient PNGs inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. And one thing that you should notice is that the color at the front of the image is also the same as at the back of the image. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this PNG like a QuickTime movie. So imagine a playhead moving across that image, and as that playhead is moving, it's getting the color of the PNG, and I can pull it into programming. So a perfect example is this, where at the top I'm showing you the PNG, and then down below I'm showing you the animation that's running off of that PNG. And so I can say like, hey, I want a lot of colors, and the animation would go very slow, or I can say I want a very few amount of colors, and the animation would go a lot faster. And so that means that when I'm working on a project, this is sort of the start, where I'm sort of picking these PNGs and picking my color tones, and know that all of this color is actually going to get pulled into programming. So if my client says, we don't like pink, I don't have to change the programming. I only have to change the image that it's sampling the color from. Of course, if I remove the PNG, then you're just left with the programmatic animation that's sampling the PNG and its color, right? So it's a really great trick. Now, here's a little example. So here I've said, hey, I want 1,000 things on screen. Randomly pick one of these two PNGs and scrub its color to change the stroke of the squares. So you notice that some of the squares are black and grayscale, and then there's the one that's got the pink and the purple. Notice that the background is also using that top PNG. So that flash in the background is that moment of white that's happening on that top PNG. So this idea of using programming in conjunction with these PNGs has been really, really helpful because it abstracts the color that the program is using, and I can update that PNG, and it updates the programming. Now, you don't always need to use gradients, so I can do just blocks of color, and of course, it would look something like this, right? So this is a tool that I've built that I know I can use in my arsenal for making work. That means that if I write a program that, like, hey, I want to make this 3D world, and I want these things kind of to spiral around in 3D, each of these forms is randomly grabbing one of those 3 PNGs and is coloring accordingly, right? And again, so why programming? Because I went to Pratt here in Brooklyn, so I went for communication design. But I liked this idea that I could write a piece of software, run it again, and get a completely new composition. So I'm letting the algorithm, so I'm the creator of the algorithm and how that algorithm is going to make the design or the artwork, and I can run this program over and over and over again, and I would get a ton of different compositions. Whereas if I was manually doing artwork in Photoshop or Illustrator, I would have to start a new file and start over again. So I really got hooked on using programming to make artwork fairly early. Second tool, right? So we're just making tools now. Transparent PNG is brush. So basically, I make all my artwork in Illustrator. These are transparent PNGs that I'm going to output. And I can use these as brushes in my programming. So, for example, I can say, great, I've got all these brushes, but now attach it to that gradient PNG, and you can see that the brushes are now flowing that one gradient PNG that has the pink and purple in it. And I'm going to be using these as brushes, and it doesn't matter whether my brushes are 2D or 3D. I can sort of program which I want to use. Here, I'm just mapping that transparent PNG to all 6 sides of a cube. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, let me just move these brushes around. And what I'm doing here is clearing the background. And if I actually don't clear the background, I then get something that looks like this, where each of these transparent PNGs that are cycling across that gradient colored PNG become like brush strokes. So I can make this artwork and sort of preview it here to see what kind of brush strokes I'm going to get from these transparent PNGs. Displacement mesh. We're tool building right now, right? So I'm frustrated with Photoshop or Illustrator because they box me into this little sandbox, and I want to do crazy things that the tool doesn't let me do. So this is another reason why I've really gravitated towards programming, is because I want to make these tools that do these weird things that maybe Photoshop and Illustrator can't do. So displacement mesh. Here, I'm just taking an image that I generated in programming, and I can actually make a mesh with it on the right-hand side. And then I'm doing things like rotating it and applying noise, and I'm displacing the graphic based on an elevation, right? So dark is going to have, black is going to have the lowest elevation, and white is going to have the highest elevation in this mesh that I've created. So then I thought, well, here I'm mapping the graphic 1-to-1. So you see the texture on the left, and then you see the mesh on the right. And I just thought, well, what happens if I just sample one column of pixels? So here, I load in this texture, but I'm sampling a 1-pixel column across that, and then mapping that 1-pixel column as the texture, and we get something that looks like this, right? And so, of course, with this tool, if I hide everything, we get something that looks like this, which is, I don't know, Laffy Taffy. So if anyone works for Willy Wonka and needs Laffy Taffy, I'm your guy. RGB Displacement Offset. This one's been fun. Again, we're tool building. We're making tools to figure out how to make work, right? So fun. What this one does is it loads in a texture on the top right, and then it loads in a displacement texture on the bottom right. And what it does is it says, I'm going to sample black and white and attach a speed to the values from black to white. So notice that the black is not moving and the white is moving. So for example, if I update this and I've introduced red, you'll notice on the upper right-hand side that both are moving, but the red is moving a little bit slower than the white, right? So thinking about this idea of how to displace and move things based on these little displacement maps, right? So if I load in a full rainbow, we get something beautiful like that. I'm sorry for your nightmares that you're going to have later on tonight. Of course, what happens if you feed both of yourselves in? You get Terminator. I don't know how that happens, but happy accident. And then I started thinking about, well, what if I'm also using that to displace the red, green, and blue channels, right? So now, not only am I displacing the artwork, but I'm displacing the different channels based on this information, right? So there's the rainbow. And of course, I've got these like little sliders, so in real time, I can sort of see how the offsets are going to look, right? Of course, I had to do this again, and this is just frightening. And I post this on Instagram at like midnight, and people are like, come on! I'm about to go to bed, jerk. So here's this in practice. So again, here, I'm loading in 2 videos. So it can work off of photographs, but it can also work off of videos. And here's a little sample of trying to figure out how I could use this technique with work. Okay. Oh, thanks. I swear to God, like half of my Instagram followers are people who do acid, mushrooms, and DMT. They're just like, I love you, bro. Okay. So sketches. So now that we've built all these tools, I go through this like sketch process. And I'm just going to show you like a sketch series with me. And what will happen is and turn the audio down on this particular section. So here, I usually will just come up with a seed idea, right? And again, I don't have an end goal. These are just sketches. This is just make work to see where you end up. And so I'll start with some like really simple ideas like, hey, you can only use black and white. Let's start with a row of artwork and change its elevation based on the audio. So it's loading in audio and then changing. And so a lot of times I think of this like building a tree, where what I'll do is say, well, like, okay, well, how do I expand on this branch? So I'll start with a seed idea and be like, well, what if there are 3 of them instead of 1? Or what happens if there's 5 of them and I'm changing the elevation of the sine wave? So this is just making work to make work, not knowing where the destination is. And usually in a sitting, I'll make maybe 70 of these or 100 of these. This one you can see I've added in the gradient color, right? So I've added in one of our tools. You can also see that all the circles are those transparent PNGs that I made inside of Illustrator. So I'm using those as brushes. And then you can see I have the displacement mesh that's there in the center that's actually sampling the artwork that's being created, and it's all reacting to the audio. So I'm taking all those tools that I just showed you and figuring out how to turn it into work. And it just mutates. It mutates. Here we put triangles in the back because everybody loves triangles. Here I'm putting the RGB melting on this piece, right? So it's just an act of figuring out where this work wants to get to. And you know, I'm just taking like a folder that says build 1 and then build 2 and then build 3, and I just keep adding and changing until eventually you get to someplace like this, right? I posted this one on Instagram, and the next morning, like every goth and industrial band on the planet had mailed me, like, we need this. And then I change it. So once I feel like, and again, if I'm using the tree metaphor, like once I feel like I've extended a branch as far as it can go, I come back to where I started and start a new branch. So I back up and start all over again in terms of the mutating. And again, I'll make hundreds of these over the course of a duration. There you can see the red, green, blue channel displacement. Come on. And then I back up again and start with the base system, but mutate it, right? So I'm just trying to figure out all the different ways that I can mutate this environment to come up with as many patterns as I can. Adding color. I'm just going through these quick so we get to the other good stuff. But this is all like in a sketches sitting, right? This is all just trying to figure out where I want to get to. Come on. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Right? Just slow mutations with no end goal in mind. If you need alien space worms, also your guy. So far, Willy Wonka candy and alien space worms, if you're taking notes. Come on. Love me. Okay. So what do I do with all this stuff? So I take all this stuff and I put it up on social media, right? I'm sharing it to all of you people. Again, with no goal in mind. And eventually, somebody sees that work and says, hey, we want that. We want that thing. So I got invited to speak at this conference in Toronto, and they said, hey, can we use this program for the branding for the conference? And so I had written a bunch of these sketches and then was able to mutate them into posters for this FITC conference up in Toronto, which the theme of the conference was transform. And again, so because I'm using programming, I could generate a bunch of these posters and they could choose. And so from that, they said, well, okay, would you, most of this stuff is animation. We've seen all these like clips that you've made. Is there a way that you could do the titles for the conference? And I said, sure. I've got this really good friend that lives here in New York, Saad Musaji, who's really good at Cinema 4D. And I thought it would be a great collaboration to take my algorithmic programs and combine them with Cinema 4D. So we tried some tests where he would do some algorithmic stuff in Cinema 4D. And then in the bottom right, it's mapping my artwork as textures into the environment. So we just looked at a couple of sketches. So this is taking my sketches and mapping them to his Cinema 4D files, just to see what kind of patterns and textures that we could come up with. Now, the theme of the conference was transform, so we were trying to figure out, how would we move through this space, and every time we sort of turn a corner or move, it would map a different piece of artwork. So how the animation started at the beginning would be completely different of how it started at the end, even though there's a geometry theme throughout the entire Cinema 4D file. So after this sort of exploration phase, again, I made the poster, and then here is the animation that we used for the titles. And this has audio. So this is the big secret. The type of work you make is the type of work you get hired to do. So it's probably a good idea to love the work you're making. People come up to me and say, how do you get to make weird shit all the time? Because I make weird shit all the time. And so social media platforms are kind of a representation of me projecting out to the world the type of work I want to make, right? So I'm doing stuff with like MIDI controllers and projection mapping and doing stuff with Arduino and 3D projecting and motors and lasers and LED. It's a reflection of the type of work that I want people to hire me to do, right? So that's kind of the theme is I do all this tool building, I do all this exploratory sketches, I put this stuff up on social media, and that's how they turn into projects, right? So when you do all this stuff, guys like this call. And he's like, hey, Josh. Hey, James. He's like, you want to make crazy shit? I'm like, I want to make crazy shit. He's like, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to build your head 17 feet tall, and people can walk into your ear and see your thoughts. So that's what we did. This was in front of the stadium in Houston, and we built his head 17 feet tall, and you could go into his ear and see James Harden's thoughts and the things that he loved, right? So when you make weird shit, people hire you to do weird shit. And so I'll just show, like, a lot of this stuff that I post on Instagram. Literally, I got pinged to do some stuff for the Super Bowl. And so you can turn the audio down on this guy. So for this, they throw these 3 parties in front of the Super Bowl. And so this one was for whatever his name is. Help me out. What's his name? What? Bruno Mars. Holy shit. And he paid me. Wow. So for nice guy. 10 out of 10 would do work for again. So this was one of the parties, and then the second party was for Taylor Swift. So Taylor Swift worked with her team to make a bunch of graphics for her stage show. She gave me a lot of concert footage and music video stuff that I got to overlay my stuff on. I got this. So there's me, Taylor Swift, because I'm definitely Team Tay-Tay, just in case you didn't know. She is super awesome, really great to work with. And for these parties, what I'm doing is building these environments, right? So I get brought into, projection map on the front of the building, which is 320 feet, and design above all the bars, and design sort of the main stage. So I'm sort of building these environments all come from the stuff that I post on Instagram, which is hilarious. Deadmau5 is another guy that I've been working with, and I just have to tell you, just like a little secret about working with people. If they pay you a lot of money, that means they get to change shit. If they don't pay you a lot of money, they just get what they get. And so it's funny because Taylor Swift, a lot of money, a lot of changes, a lot of chefs in the kitchen. Deadmau5, I have no money, do whatever the fuck you want. Is kind of the deal. And so I'm one of 4 or 5 artists that he uses for his main show. Every time we get together, we take this photo, which is me like super excited and him super bummed. We've been doing that now for almost 11 years, which is hilarious. He loves me. Kiran Gandhi, I was going to show this piece, and I'm sort of running out of time, so I won't show it all, but you also have to make time for passion projects. And so this is a project that I worked on a couple of years ago for 6 months for no money. And doing these kind of things, collaborating with other people with no money and just the pursuit of making something is also super important. So you've got to find ways to sort of like expand your sandbox, make work without any end destination in mind, do that big client work, but also find time to do these sort of passion projects. And I always try to do 1 or 2 of these a year where there's no money, there's just an idea, finding collaborators to come up with new ways of expanding my sandbox, right? And so I'm just going to end with, all of this goes back to tool building, right? So it's a perfect loop. And I find myself getting back into the studio and back into making programming to sort of, figure out what the next year is going to be. So I'm going to end this with the future belongs to those who work hard for it today. I'm sure you're going to hear this a lot today. There is no auto kick-ass button in Photoshop. It's just shut the fuck up. It's just hard work. Okay? And, I want to end on this because, I have to remind myself, and I'm reminding you, there will never be the perfect moment. You'll never have the right hair color. You'll never be wearing the right clothes. You'll never work for the right studio. Nothing is going to be perfect. And because there will never be the right moment, fucking today looks awesome. Let's go make something. Get started. You just have to go out and make it. I hope you had fun. I'm going to be downstairs, I think, talking with Zach. So if you have any questions about sort of the work that I make, please join me downstairs. And come on. Come on. Come on, the last slide's the best. Please. Thank you. Thanks a lot.